Hi, welcome to episode 7 of the Vulture podcast, where we're going to talk about all things reselling, the behind the scenes of it all. And I am Vulture, Elaine Mingus, your host. You can find all of my available inventory at curbvulture.com. I'm located in the Austin, Texas area. And you can also find me at Vulture on Instagram and Elaine Mingus on TikTok. Today, I am super excited to invite our guest on here, Casey Kidwell, who is going to talk all about the vintage clothing side of things. So I sell vintage furniture. She sells these beautiful dresses. And so welcome to the show, Casey. Please state your name, your Instagram handle for the audience so we can know where to find you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, first of all, Elaine, for having me. I am so excited to chat with you today. Like you said, all the behind the scenes of vintage, well, really all things vintage. But as Elaine mentioned, my name is Casey Kidwell. My business is Papaya Drive. On Instagram, I am Shop Papaya Drive. My personal Instagram is Almost Fab Me. So you can find me at either of those places, really, across Instagram as well as TikTok. My website is caseykidwell.com as well. So if you ever forget, you can always just look up my name and it should steer you in the right direction.
Yeah. And you also do kind of like Austin, Texas behind the scenes, like where to go get the best ice cream and hamburgers, right? As well on the Almost
Yes.
Fab Me. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. That's what Almost Had Me is all about. So it was originally a blog that I started after I graduated from college. And that's kind of just morphed into my personal business. So Papaya Drive is my baby and my actual business, but Almost Fab Me is kind of the fun personal side too.
And so we met because you bought something from me. So I met you and your significant other. And so tell me a little bit about, because that's a really interesting story, because you have done extensive traveling in a bus, right?
Yes. So my husband and I own a Sprinter. So I will say, Elaine, I think we kind of got in on the Sprinter craze like right at the beginning. If you remember during COVID, it was so popular and everyone and their mother was either traveling in a Sprinter or owned a Sprinter. So we were kind of inspired actually on a road trip. We saw one of those vans that says like drive across America or something when we were on a road trip. I was like, that would actually be really fun. We love road trips. We ended up going online as soon as we got home and looked it up, and it was so expensive just to rent these that we were like, maybe we should just invest and buy our own. And it ended up being the best investment for us. We ended up renting it out after we lived in it and traveled in it for a few months on our own, and then we wanted to be able to share it with other people. And now, I mean, everyone listening knows what a pain traveling is now, especially in this post pandemic world. Like, not only is it expensive, but it's just kind of a pain in the butt. So, traveling in a Sprinter and just being able to get up and go and wherever and whenever we want has been such a blessing.
Yeah. So you've bought a couple pieces from me, I believe, right? Maybe you can tell me. I know that there's two bookcases that
Yep.
go on the side of your TV, right?
Yes. I think I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. Those definitely for sure. And I look at them every day. So they're a good reminder kind of
Yeah.
how we initially met, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I think that's so exciting because it is just such a memorable thing, especially as a business owner, when you're doing Shop Papaya. You are able to say, look, I have this beautiful thing where I'm able to do vintage and sustainability, but then you have this other like alt lifestyle that is so interesting. And I think really does bring people even more so into your page and humanizes you. Like, I'm not just a reseller. I'm also a person that I like adventure and I like travel. So I love that about you. So tell me a little bit about how you got into business and how you came across this name that you chose, Papaya Drive.
Yes, definitely. So, how I got into the business is a bit of a long story, but I will make it short and sweet for your audience. I actually have a background in sales as well as marketing. So, I worked for Nike for over 7 years. And it's funny, Elaine, because honestly, when I was 21, 22, starting at the company, I remember being in the interview and thinking, like, this 9 to 5 lifestyle is just not what I imagined myself doing, to be totally honest. And I was saying that, then in an interview when I still ended up getting the job somehow. But, it's funny to look back on that now and to know that I am pursuing this life now as a solopreneur. It kind of all made sense. But regardless, my background is in sales and marketing, like I said, working for Nike. And it got to the point, as it did for many people, Elaine, I'm sure you've spoken to so many people who are like this, who, over the course of the pandemic, priorities shifted for sure. Not to mention it was just a time to kind of like reflect on your priorities and what you really wanted to do. And for me, it was a big shift in that regard. And I realized that it was the time, it was the time for me to kind of take a leap of faith. There were, of course, a few other things along the way that kind of shoved me quite literally in that direction. And I ultimately made the decision. My husband and I moved from California to Austin, Texas, where we've now been for the last couple years. And like I said, I kind of got shoved in the direction of starting my business. Vintage has been a love of mine for as long as I can remember, which kind of ties in the name of my business as well. So my business, as I made mention of at the beginning, is Papaya Drive. And that is actually the street that I grew up on. So I was born and raised in that little house on Papaya Drive. And I was raised by a single mom, and that's kind of always been something that she and I have shared together, is our love of thrifting and vintage and fashion and home goods and all of those kind of things that come along with this amazing industry that we're in. So when I was thinking of a name for my business, it felt like, really, what better name than, the place that kind of birthed that inspiration for me.
I love that. It's like a nod to the nostalgia of the past, a nod to your mom, a nod to everything that is good and wholesome. And I know that you have some amazing stories about how you have acquired some of the things, because it's not vintage furniture, it's vintage clothing. So what made you decide, like, was it always clothing that you were going to do, or do you have tchotchkes and stuff like that you do as well?
Yes, it's definitely a little bit of everything, I will say, because as I made mention of, it is my lifestyle truly. So it's not just relegated to clothing. But to answer your question, and again, kind of a bit of a long story, but the universe really truly shoved me in this direction. So I quit my job in October of 2022, and it was the end of the year. So I knew I wanted to give myself some time, the holidays at least, to kind of reflect before launching into whatever this next chapter was for me. And as I made mention of, that little 21, 22-year-old Casey always wanted to start her own business. So I knew that was the direction that I wanted to go in, but what that looked like, I wasn't 100% sure. So I gave myself some time, like I said, to reflect. And then at the beginning of 2023, I guess, I received an email. So a cold email from someone via my blog. As I made mention, I had started a blog in 2015. That was kind of like my online diary, post college and trying to navigate life. And this woman had literally found me via Google and my blog because I had written about vintage fashion in the Sacramento area. And she was based not too far from the Sacramento area. Her best friend, her lifelong best friend, had suddenly passed away around the holiday season. And she was not only a seamstress, but also a collector of all things vintage. And she had this, it was literally a barn, like an ADU on her property that was just full of, as you see now on my site, dresses and vintage clothing. And she was like, I really don't want this to end up in a landfill. Like, any of us would never want that to happen. And so she reached out, and, I definitely did my digging on my end to make sure this wasn't some weird scam that seemed too good to be true, because that's kind of how it felt. But on a whim, I was like, okay, I got you. I hear you. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I literally took the leap and I flew from Austin, Texas back home to Sacramento. My mom and I rented a U-Haul and drove, and literally, I mean, a U-Haul, like a small U-Haul, and filled up this entire van with dresses. It was, I still, like, when I'm retelling it, I'm like, there's no way that happened or that was real life, because it was just one of the wildest things in my life.
Yeah, I have very similar stories where I found this warehouse or storage unit. They were like $50, come clean it out. That's all you got to do, is come clean it out, get all this stuff, and you just have to do it by the end of the day. $50. And it was a 10 by 20, and it was full of vintage teacups and plates and furniture and, East Lake antiques, and a washer and dryer. And I went there and I got it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much stuff. And it was another flipper, but it was a man flipper. So he was looking for baseball cards and things that were more manly, and things
Mhm.
that he knew how to flip. He didn't want to deal with all this grandma stuff. And it literally had the stickers, like Goodwill stickers. Like, it obviously was like a collector or somebody who wanted to shop, but something happened and they stopped paying their storage unit fees. And I just like was able to get all this stuff. And that's really what shifted me from picking up stuff on the side of the curb to actually doing more vintage stuff. Cause I mean, so many people were just like hungry for all these beautiful antiques and vintage pieces. So I totally understand how like the universe or God sends you like this thing, and you're like, I did not ask for this, but I'm guessing this is what I'm doing.
Right, and
And
you
it
feel
just,
kind of, like, responsible, right? Especially for you and I, like, being in this industry and having the love for sustainability and, vintage fashion as well as furniture. It's like you feel so responsible, and especially
yeah,
with her saying, "I don't want them to end up in a landfill," and I'm thinking, "I don't either," and who knows, where they will go if I don't come in and steward these onto their next life just like you do with furniture. It's the same kind of thing. And I think it's a really beautiful responsibility at the same time for us to have,
yeah.
and, one that we take seriously, obviously.
Absolutely. And I want to get definitely back on kind of that sustainability, because I'm interested, because you did work at Nike and you have this, sustainability passion. But before I get on that part, I did want to talk about the type of dresses that you got from this lady are kind of a specific style. So like I'm wearing a vintage, I wore this for you,
Thank
a
you.
vintage with shoulder pads. It's beautiful. It's one of my favorites, but it's your stuff. I mean, it definitely, I think, includes stuff like this, but it's a lot of the, and I'm blanking on the name of the type of dresses, the
The
kind
gunny
of
sack.
gunny sack. There you go. And so it's a lot of the gunny sack dresses. So kind of explain, when you got there at the storage unit or at her ADU, what was there?
Oh my gosh. So it was, like I said, it was kind of a little barn ADU type thing that was on her property. So the first floor was all like her sewing room. So it was wedding dresses, it was projects that she had been working on because she was a seamstress and a creative herself. And then you walked up the stairs, and the second floor was just this makeshift inventory room. There were kind of like pipes hung from the ceiling and just clothes and clothes and clothes as far as the eye could see, as well as fabrics and whatnot. And I'm so grateful that I was with my mom at the time, because I think, my knowledge of gunny sack now is so much more than what it was then. And I think one of the first dresses my mom saw was a gunny sack. And, having been raised in the 70s, she was like, oh wow, Case, these are amazing. So I think that was kind of fun to have that new discovery together. But yes, to your initial question, the dresses that I have primarily right now. So I will say I inherited about 500 pieces from this woman. So just under 500 pieces. I will say at least 85+% of them are dresses, if not more than that. And a lot of them, like you mentioned, were gunny sack dresses. So think very prairie style, kind of this like cottage core for those that might not be familiar with gunny sack, which has been around since the 60s. They're very like that prairie kind of dress, cottage core style that's really popular right now. So that's been kind of fun too, right? To be able to like usher in a new generation that is already loving this style, and you already see it so much out in the world, but having an understanding that, it has been around forever, and now you can have these pieces that have such a rich history and invite them into your own closet and help them kind of have a new life with you too.
Yeah. Well, and I know for a little bit, Target tried to do a little bit of the gunny sack look, but I mean, and I know it got a lot of hate on Instagram because they were like, we can't do this. But there's a whole community around gunny sacks that they kind of really love this look. Kind of, have
Yes.
you? I mean, I don't know if you were in this community already, or now you're just expanding your brain to be in this community. Kind of tell me about that community.
It's been very much a brain expansion on my end. I was not aware, like I said, not only, my knowledge was limited of gunny sack, but to your point, the community, Elaine, it is like a cult. It is so wild, the following that gunny sack dresses have, because this is a brand that has been around decades, right? And so there is really so much to learn, which I have been so appreciative of the community for, right? There are Facebook groups, there are all kinds of platforms where you can go on and learn about the dresses, but also share, your pieces with other people who love them and collect them and whatnot. So I think that has been one of the biggest eye-opening experiences for me, but also really enjoyable, like you said, to learn, because there's plenty to learn about them, and I'm still learning to this day for sure.
And so, what is the price range of the dresses? Because I'm sure there's some that are, and even not the gunny sacks, but the price range of the gunny sacks, and then the price range of your items all together. Like, because like some of the gunny sacks I think can go for a couple hundred. Am I right?
Oh my gosh, yes. So the gunny sack is really interesting, those dresses, because it kind of depends, obviously, on a number of things. It depends on the style, the age of them. I had ones in my collection that had the original tag, so like the hang tag from the store, which was so wild. And kind of a little piece of me felt really badly even selling it, because it just feels like such a piece of fashion history that I should keep. But I'm glad to have shared it with someone else who will love it. So it really ranges. The older ones from the 60s that have a black tag are more rare. They're considered more rare, so they are more valuable. But then as you kind of go on in time and get to some of the 80s fashion that, not to be controversial, but maybe was a little bit less coveted for some people, those dresses can be a little bit less. So the ones that I've sold are kind of from the 80s are usually like under 100, so anywhere from 75 to 100. But honestly, Elaine, I have sold a dress for $800, and that was just one
Wow.
dress. So like you made mention of, they really do run the full gamut, and it really just depends on a number of things, and they're such collector's pieces, a lot of them. That being said, I am expanding my business beyond just dresses. And while I'm so grateful to the dresses that have kind of sparked my business and started my business, I always wanted to do more than that. And to me, where my passion lies is really just inviting people into the world of sustainable and secondhand fashion. So my price points are much lower. And I was just having this conversation with someone, like, how I approach it is I would much rather someone, whether it's at a market or coming to my booth or online, whatever it might be, I want someone to come in and feel like I can buy an entire outfit. I can have the jewelry, I can have the clothes, the shoes, and feel confident from a financial perspective being able to do that versus having to maybe like choose between one piece or the other. So that's really what's most important to me, is just kind of more so inviting people into the world of sustainable fashion and not making it cost prohibitive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that my own business has made a shift in itself now. I mean, obviously I went from picking up stuff on the side of the road to vintage. And right now my inventory has dwindled down, and I've allowed it to dwindle down. Number one, I think just because I was pushing so hard, and I kind of got to a place where it's just like I need to sit back and figure out what my passion is again. Because my passion is communication. It's doing things like podcasting, it's creating content. And while I love vintage furniture, and I definitely will continue to do that, I definitely am like you. I want to just promote I want to promote other people. I want to promote sustainability, because as a mom of seven, like, it's waste not, want not at my house. Like, I grew up with stories of my mom talking about how she had to straighten out bent nails for her Depression era grandfather. So these are the stories that drive me. And it's like, it drives me nuts when I see waste, when I see things that are on the side of the road, whether it be an IKEA dresser or a vintage piece, going, wait a second, somebody somewhere like is hurting, and they need that piece for half the price that IKEA sells it or Walmart sells it. And I can bring it into my home, clean it off, stage it, and get it to somebody for half price, so that it becomes that affordable piece. And it's kind of a win-win for the environment, win for the person that can buy it for half price, and win for me to put money in my pocket so I can buy groceries for my big family of 9. So I totally understand how businesses shift as you're continuing, and you're so grateful for where you started, but you have an eye on someplace else where you want to go that fits and aligns more with who you are as a person. So I totally understand that. So tell me, maybe, you've already kind of told me a story about that you love. Tell me something that maybe about your business that you would love somebody listening to know about you, that's kind of something important to you.
That's a great question. I think, goodness, probably what if I could expand on what I was just talking about and really my passion for inviting people, I think, into this community is something that I really want to focus on in the year going forward. So, that could look like a number of new kind of directions that I'm thinking about moving in. But for example, like styling or personal sourcing, one of my best friends from back home had a party that she was going to recently, and she's trying to dabble a little bit more into thrifting and secondhand fashion and stuff. So she reached out and I helped her put together an outfit for a party. So, I'm trying to expand my business to, like I said, just really be super inclusive to people who are a bit maybe intimidated by or scared by the idea of thrifting. Because, I mean, trust me, I get it. I know you do too, Elaine. We have spent our fair share of time in thrift stores, in estate sales. It's overwhelming. Like, I totally understand. But I think that's where we can come in, right, as experts and as people who are passionate about introducing people to this space and really help in that direction. So I think something that I would love people to know about me is the, kind of customer service, like personal element of it, as you made mention of earlier, having a personal brand and as well as a business brand. But I really want to be able to meld the two together too. And I am a person, behind Papaya Drive. So that's why I do kind of try and come on and do Instagram stories, like showing my face quite a bit and stuff too, because that element is just as important to me. I want someone, I've had people in my DMs sending me pictures, Elaine, that are like, how would you style this top? And I'm like, oh my God, I love this. Like, let's do it. So,
I
that's
love
kind
that.
of, yeah, I do too. And it made me so happy, I think, when that happened, because to the point of this like conversation and question too, right? It's like you have created a space and you have cultivated a space where people feel safe and comfortable doing that. And that's what's most important to me, is making sure that I am creating and cultivating that space and that community so that people aren't afraid to send me a DM in the dressing room and be like, Casey, help me. Like, do I get
Yeah.
this or no? And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
girl,
And
let's do
I've done
something
the same
else.
thing where somebody has texted me and been like, with this, and usually it's like, oh, is this piece available and would it look good in this space? And a lot of times I'm like, actually, it's too thick for that space. You need like a gold table or something like that. And they'll send me, oh my gosh, I found this and it looks perfect. You were so right. And that makes, it's not just about me selling my own product. It's about me making sure that the person behind that phone has something that they're proud of because they're living in their space. And it's a very sacred place that they invite you into. I mean, if they're inviting you into the Goodwill thrift store dressing room and sending you
Right.
photos, that's really, I mean, you're talking about a friendship there, which is, goes way beyond the, big business model where I mean, it's just, you're just another number to them. I had a quick thought. I was like, it'd be really cool. I'm really anti MLM, but you know how they do the parties at home, like where you could bring in like vintage clothes and like be like, and this piece, like, and talk about the sustainability. Like, so you could almost, and if you don't do it, somebody listening, like starting some sort of like MLM style, but not MLM, sustainable, like where you go and source it, because people don't also have the time and they don't know they don't have the knowledge of what is vintage or is it
Right.
quality or what should I pay for it. And so
Right.
having someone come into your home maybe and like giving like a presentation, like the old school Avon parties, that would be kind of a fun thing to
Yeah.
do,
No, I
especially
had
with smaller
someone.
inventory like that.
Right. I honestly had someone, Elaine, it's funny that you say that, because at one of my recent markets, I had a mom and daughter come into my booth and I had some dresses in my booth, and she made mention of her daughter's upcoming dance or prom or something. And a little part of me inside was like, oh my God, she aged me, because she was saying how it was vintage themed or something. And I'm like, oh wow, okay. But she made mention of exactly that there was a group of girls, right, who are looking for dresses. And I'm like, heck yeah, let's do a shopping party. Like, I will bring my stuff over. So I love that idea. And I'm so on board because, like we're saying, right, it brings in that more personal element. It's like, I'm doing all the work for you and I'm coming to you. And then let's have a conversation about it. And I can help you feel and look your best for whatever that event might be.
Yeah, and I love the idea of bringing it to the next generation because I did the calculations. I was listening to a geopolitics speech about how Texas is like it's up there like between two different countries like France and India on how much our gross domestic product is. And I started doing the calculations about like the children under the age 18 and under and how much money, because like my children, God forbid, I'm so sorry, they shop on Shein. They're broke little kids, right? And they can get a top or an outfit for $10. And there's that place where, as somebody, you're like, I'm having to make a decision between sustainable and affordable, and that's hard. But when I did the calculations, it was something like $700 million or something like that. That just the 13 to 18 crowd is spending. If they spend $50 a month, if half of what the population spends $50 a month on Shein, that's like $700 million that another country is getting of sweat labor, cheap labor. That is, and I mean, you can't blame them. They're kids, right? But if they were informed, if you had a little party where you're talking about why sustainability is so important and why, what happens on the other end when they're buying from these big conglomerates. I think that would, I mean, it just plants a seed, and, we can't always see the fruit from that, but, just enough that we're trying to move forward in the right direction. And so just real quickly, and we don't have to get too political here, but the fact that you work for Nike, and do you feel like, do you feel better, or were you happy at working at Nike? Because I know that there's a lot of controversy surrounding Nike, and now you're in an entirely different field with sustainability. Kind of talk about that, whatever you're comfortable talking about, because I don't want to get too political and
Yeah.
get you in trouble on that.
No, of course. And look, I am so grateful for my experience at Nike. I was there, like I said, 7.5 years. And my grandma used to always joke, she's like, Case, you are getting a real life MBA. And I really did. My experience is unmatched. And I know it has set me up for success as my own business owner now and kind of going forward into my career. But of course, Elaine, like I won't lie, I think, I will be honest, I haven't purchased anything from Nike since I left, just because I am so much more aware, of waste when it comes to clothes and shoes and all of the in between. And the reality is that Nike, as much as we might not think it, is a fast fashion brand, And so I think my awareness, of course, after leaving has heightened. And now that I am so much more passionate about secondhand shopping, whether it's for my home or for my closet, that has kind of shifted, my priorities as well. But to answer your question, it wasn't necessarily something that was at the forefront of my mind when I was working there, because it was, I don't know, it just wasn't top of mind. It was more so, what event was going on or what influencer we were going to use or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm so grateful for my experience. And I think now, having had the behind the scenes look working for a big brand, right, I am that much more passionate about supporting the little guy, and as a little guy myself over here, and really making sure that I continue to cultivate and learn more about sustainable fashion going forward too. And like you're saying, sharing it with other people as well.
Yeah, yeah. And by no means am I an extremist. Like, I know some people really are like, extreme. I mean, shoes, especially, like I got boys, they're running. I mean, that it's just a consumable product in general. But definitely one of the things that I've thought about recently is like, whether you're buying, unless you're buying from a brand that's expensive, that is is trying to be sustainable, like it's all coming from China. It's all being mass produced in sweatshops and stuff like that. So whether it's, a brand that's higher end or a Shein, you unless you don't really know where, if it's sustainable. And then also, one of the things that I've been thinking, because I saw somebody on Instagram that said proudly made in China, because she was a small business herself in China. And she was like, I'm trying to fight this idea that made in China has to mean bad. It could mean that it's from a small business and sustainable. It's a lot more rare, maybe, but I just thought, man, she's over here just like me, trying to do something important, and she's going to say made in China, and it's going to have a whole different meaning. So, taking that and putting that in mind too is also like, we live in a world of people, not just, that they're, yes, there's big companies, but there's people, and they all have feelings and emotions and dreams just like us. So, I want to ask this question because it's one of my favorite questions. Like I said on my podcast the other day, is that I got asked this and I thought, man, this is such a thought-provoking question. What is an area in your business, in your life, that you feel very expansive, you feel very good, like you've got sure footing on? And then what's an area in your business that you could use support?
Hmm. Goodness. Wow, that is a really good question. Um, I think I would kind of touch back on what I said earlier about the community piece. I feel really good about building a brand. That's something that I love. So I just recently opened my booth at Lady Collective over the weekend. So this is my first kind of like brick and mortar, thank you, brick and mortar, if you will. Shop Papaya Drive IRL, as I like to say. So that part I feel really good about, Elaine. Like, I love merchandising. I love the physical manifestation of Papaya Drive, the branding, the advertising, the marketing. Like, that is my background. And building this brand, right? As Casey, as Papaya Drive. I love that stuff. It's the creative visual person in me, right? However, I think the flip side of that also, and I will be totally transparent and vulnerable here, is I very much suffer from analysis paralysis. So I'm sure yourself, as well as a lot of people listening, are very familiar with this. I'm a perfectionist through and through. And as much as this, sounds like an interview question, right? Where you're talking about what are your weaknesses and you make it sound like it's a strength, right? That's not what I'm doing here, people. Just stay with me for a second. So I overanalyze everything. So even like launching my business, launching my website. I mean, I built my website, but before I built it out, I was like spent so much time thinking it's not going to look how I want it to. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be visually exactly where I want it to be. I should just hire someone. Like, I spend a lot of time in my head day in and day out over analyzing every little thing that I do because I want it to be perfect. And I feel like it's a representation of me. So it has to have that certain level. It has to meet those expectations that I have, which are very, very high for myself. So as a result of that, it takes me longer to do things. And sometimes, honestly, Elaine, I won't even do it because I shoot myself in the foot because I overanalyze things. So I do this like so often, even now, where I'll see other people and I think, gosh, Case, like you can do that. Like, why aren't you doing that? You're just as capable. But it's all of the time that I spend in my head over analyzing that keeps me from doing a lot of those things. So it's a really long-winded answer, but that's what I would say, I suffer from, to be honest. And I think it's like an imposter syndrome thing, maybe too. I know people talk about that quite a bit, but yeah,
Yeah,
the analysis paralysis.
I don't think you're alone in that. I think that we all get in our head and we look outward so much and we start comparing, well, like it's not good enough or whatever. And it's like this place where part of becoming a successful business is accepting who you are, where you are, as you are right now, and knowing that like it may be messy, it may be imperfect, but like you can always improve on it. But if you don't, you can't move a parked car. You have to be a car in motion. And so just one of my favorite pieces of advice when I'm talking on stages and talking about business is you have to just do it dirty. It has to be imperfect. And now obviously, you want to, if you can improve on it quickly, then let's do that. But it's okay to do it dirty and then keep improving upon it, and especially like I'm doing, when I'm making a story or a reel, I always ask before publishing, can I make it better and how quickly? And then if not, let's just publish it. And then not second guessing myself and deleting the reel after I post it like 3 seconds later. Because I know that that's it. So you're definitely not alone. I think that a lot of people can probably very much relate to that sentiment.
Right.
So
And like you said, it's the comparison thing, I think, right? Also, which doesn't help. And the reality is, all of us every single day are comparing ourselves to others, whether we think we are or not. So I think that's a really good point, too.
yeah, I've heard that comparison is the thief of joy. And it's like when I have 7 kids. So one of the things that I think really is beautiful about children is that they like have blinders on, like up until a certain point. I've got my youngest, he's 6. Like he thinks he's the coolest thing. Like he has no, like everybody else's opinion doesn't matter. And so I think if we can be more like children and like in business and just have blinders on and be like, what I'm doing is awesome. And I think some of that confidence comes off when you're on stage or on screen on Instagram. You're just like, I am stupid confident and you love it. And people are like, I do love it, and then you got the haters and then they're not your people. But just being stupid confident and just going, you know what, like I'm going to embrace it all because, you know, YOLO, you only live once. Like you've only been given this body and this mind and this face and you're doing this thing. And it's like, you might as well like go big or go home there. So yeah.
Right.
So what is one of the big, if someone is starting, if they're starting either a vintage clothing or whatever it is that, a sustainable business, what is one takeaway, like tip that you wish you would have known when you were starting out? What would you tell younger Casey?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like it kind of goes off on what we're talking about right now, right? The idea of just doing it, like just go for it because you really do learn as you go. So as much as younger Casey, a little over a year and a half ago now that I started my business, as much as I was so fearful of not doing it perfectly, I did end up just doing it, right? And just like going for it. And because of that, like you're saying, I have learned so much along the way, but I wouldn't have if I hadn't have just launched and gone off into the space. So I have a lot of conversations with, undergraduate or young people who are kind of going off into the world. And that is the biggest piece of advice whenever they ask me that I give is just try it. Like, especially when you're that age where you don't, you're not settled down necessarily and you don't have other mouths to feed or whatever. Like, now is the time to just go for it. And not to say that you can't later in life. It's just a little bit easier when you don't have as much pressure, right? Like riding on it. So try everything and see what works, because you really don't know whether it's what you like, what you don't like, what works or what doesn't work. You don't know until you try, right? And you just put it out there and you can kind of get feedback along the way from other people and whatnot. So, like, biggest piece of advice, which is funny, I always feel like the advice that I give is like, look in the mirror, Casey, it's advice that I'm giving to myself as well. But literally, it would be just to go for it and try because you will learn along the way. And whether that's easily or not so easily, you're learning at the end of the day, but you won't learn unless you just put yourself out there and kind of test things out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm thinking about businesses that were started pre-internet, pre-social media, how the good and the bad that goes along with that. Like when you weren't on social media, you could just do your business and you could put those blinders on and be like, well, I don't have anybody to compare myself to. I'm the only vintage shop in town. And now you get to see the entire world and all the vintage shops and all that they're doing. And so comparing yourself is probably a lot more, more, what we do. But in the same vein, how much more information a vintage owner and how much more marketing and how much more exposure can we get today is also this beautiful thing. And so, I totally know that like when you're like, just, you want to, because, and then on top of that, like everything that you do is like Memorex. So like you can go back and scroll down my feed and say, man, she didn't know what she was doing in the beginning. But it's also like this place, like for other people who are starting out, like she didn't know what she was doing. And so maybe I can start and I can do it too. And I eventually, 10 years down the road, might be where she is at. And I love the saying that says, don't ever compare your beginning to somebody else's middle, because you just starting out are, of course, you're going to make mistakes. Even if you listen to all the podcasts in the world, you're still going to make mistakes for yourself and you're still going to learn. There's still things, challenges that you need to learn, not only as a business owner, but you as a person. And so I love that advice. So just for the audience to remember, where can we find you at on Instagram, on your website, and just a little bit recap where we can find you?
Yeah, definitely. So first, I will just say thank you again so much for having me. This was so much fun. I feel like we could keep talking for hours. But again, my name is Casey Kidwell. I am the founder and owner of Papaya Drive. You can find me on Instagram at Shop Papaya Drive, as well as my website, which is caseykidwell.com. I'm also on Etsy under Papaya Drive. And my personal Instagram is almost fab, like almost fabulous. me. So feel free, send me a message, reach out. I would love to connect with you, whether it's related to finding, the best ice cream in Austin or coffee or whatever it might be, or finding a new vintage piece for your home and closet. So I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And join us next week as we continue to talk about the behind the scenes of vintage reselling and all things business. I am your host, Elaine Mingus. You can find me at Curb Vulture on Instagram and curbvulture.com for all of my inventory. See you next week.